So I'd like to, for the homily, focus on the gospel, which is quite well known to us because it gives rise to the Apostle Thomas, often being referred to as Doubting Thomas. And so as we heard, on the first Easter Sunday evening, Jesus appears to the disciples in the upper room and shows himself risen from the dead. They're all there except Thomas. And when Thomas returns, they tell him, "We've seen the Lord." And as you heard, he's like, "I'm not going to believe it until I actually see him and probe his wounds." And then the following Sunday, which is why the church has this gospel today, the Sunday after Easter, this time they're together and Thomas is with them. And as we heard, Jesus appears and gives Thomas the opportunity to probe his wounds, which he does, and Thomas comes to believe. That's great for him. But what about us? Especially since the gospel says, "But these things are written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, and through this belief have life in his name." So I just wanted to kind of reflect a bit on this gospel with us, brothers and sisters. See what might be of benefit to us in our faith. I guess first it just strikes me, it seems clear that Jesus expected that Thomas would believe without having seen him, right? Just on the basis of the witness of the other 10 apostles. He basically says that, right? And I think what Jesus has in mind is things like, well, at least 3 times in Scripture we know that Jesus said to the apostles, "I'm going to suffer and die, but then I'm going to rise from the dead on the 3rd day." Probably they have said it more times than that, but at least we have 3. So he already alerted them ahead of time. Secondly, Thomas, you've got 10 apostles telling you that they've seen me. It's not just one person, maybe they're deluded, but 10 of them, right? And then, and Tom, you know these guys. You know they're not mentally unbalanced. You know they're not emotionally unstable. You know they're not liars. And so I think because of all of that, Jesus expected that Thomas would believe without having to actually see him. But despite that, when Thomas doesn't believe, Jesus gives Thomas the proof that he asked for. And why is that? And I think, brothers and sisters, it's because of what I said at the beginning of Mass, that today is Divine Mercy Sunday, the annual reminder that God's disposition, his inclination toward us is kindness and mercy, that he has a heart full of compassion for us. And so you see it reflected in how Jesus treats Thomas. Even while on the one hand he expects Thomas, "You should have believed without having to see me." Yet when he doesn't believe, Jesus doesn't write him off. Well, he had enough proof. No, Jesus mercifully accommodates himself to Thomas by giving Thomas the opportunity to see him and to probe his wounds. So, despite Thomas's lack of belief, Jesus doesn't leave him behind. He doesn't back away from Thomas. In a moment, I want to say something about Thomas also not backing away. But before I get there, I'd like to take a kind of a small detour in the homily. Or maybe, I don't know, if the homily is a highway, I'm going to pause at a rest stop for a moment, and then we'll get back on. The detour is Jesus allowing Thomas to probe his wounds. And I think, brothers and sisters, this shows us, among many other things, that Jesus and the Catholic Church do not foster blind faith. They value both faith and reason. Just think about all the schools, universities, educational institutions that are Catholic. Is that an expression of blind faith? The Church sees no inconsistency between a life of faith and a life of reason. She believes God created both, and in fact, that faith is reasonable. Okay, so that, as I said, that was just kind of a pause at a rest stop for a moment. Now, get back on the highway. So I was saying, so on the one hand, Jesus expected Thomas to believe, but when he didn't, Jesus didn't write him off. He didn't back away from him. But in fairness to Thomas, although he has doubts, he doesn't back away from the community of believers, right? A week after announcing, "I will not believe unless I see him," where is he? He's back with the other 10 apostles. He's with the community of faith. There was enough openness for him to stay with them and to be present with them the next Sunday when Jesus does appear. Somehow Thomas, despite his unbelief, is still seeking. And you know, brothers and sisters, sometimes people in times of doubt with their faith begin to back off from prayer or coming to Mass. And I think Thomas shows us that the opposite is the way to deal with doubts. Having faith doesn't mean that we never have doubts or questions. Faith is not always clear and unchallenged. Mother Teresa one time wrote this about her experience of faith. "Where is my faith? There is nothing but emptiness." And she's a saint. And so that's why I say, faith is not always clear and unchallenged. There are times in the spiritual life when God seems distant, unresponsive, absent. Yet the way to deal with these times is not to back off from the community of faith, but keep coming to church, keep praying, talk to someone who might have the answers we're looking for. Remember, right, Thomas comes to faith where? In the environment of the community with the other 10 apostles. Thomas also shows us the flip side of the coin of the communal dimension of faith, namely, that the community is necessary, but it isn't a substitute for personal belief. We cannot simply believe because somebody else believes. Certainly, there are times when faith may be rocky, in which we need to rely on the support and people sustaining us in our faith, but others cannot believe for us. It's not within the power of the disciples to give faith to Thomas. They can witness to it, they can talk about its impact in their life, by words or their own actions, but they don't have it within them to give faith to Thomas. Thomas shows us that our own faith must be rooted in our own deepest convictions, our own personal encounter with the Lord. But the community can bear witness to that faith. So it isn't an either or. It's me and the Lord, or me and the community. It's both dimensions, the personal and communal, are necessary in the life of faith. Okay, just two final thoughts. The first is this. In today's gospel, Jesus was able to pass through locked doors twice in order to appear to his disciples and give them faith in him. That certainly says a lot about the marvels of his resurrected body. But you know, it also says something equally as profound about his desire to help us. Just as there are no physical barriers to stop Jesus from reaching his disciples, so there is no obstacle, question, fear, doubt, sin so great that it can block him from granting faith to somebody who seeks. All that's required is a sincere openness to reach out to Christ, much like Thomas did. Why is that? Because Jesus is merciful toward us. All right, final thought. In today's gospel, we see that Thomas wants not just to have Jesus to appear to him, but Thomas wants to touch Jesus' wounds. I think probably what's going on in his mind is he wants to verify that this person in front of him, alive, is the same person who a few days earlier hung on a cross, who was pierced by nails and a spear. He wants to make sure this is the same person. But isn't it striking that even after his resurrection, Jesus still bears the marks of his crucifixion in his risen body? I mean, first glance, I would think, oh, he's risen from the dead, never to die again. They would all be taken away. But they're not. He still bears them. Pope Francis comments on this. The wounds never pass away. They remain. For those wounds are the enduring sign of God's love for us. And then he adds this. They are essential for believing in God. Not for believing that God exists, but for believing that God is love, mercy, and faithfulness. So, brothers and sisters, Jesus still bears the wounds of love he endured for us because they are eternal reminder to us of how much he really does care for us, how much compassion and mercy he has towards us.